It started with little things trivial if you looked at them individually. Rachel's Instagram posts of sparkling beaches and high-end resorts didn't always line up with the timeline she gave me before leaving. A Tuesday sunrise photo posted at what was clearly midnight in whatever time zone she claimed to be in. Her itinerary often had glaring gaps, and her once reliable updates from her trips turned sporadic. Of course, there were the gifts thoughtfully chosen, luxurious little tokens from her travels that would magically appear on our doorstep, even when she'd forgotten to stop anywhere. She was a travel influencer, a dream job, right? She'd work with high-end brands, jetting off to tropical destinations and picturesque mountain retreats to promote luxury escapes. Rachel loved her work and she was good at it, no doubt about that. Her captions were so perfectly curated, her photos almost glowing with authenticity. But lately that authenticity started to feel too polished, too calculated. At first I brushed it off. Influencing was her world, not mine. But the uneasiness gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Then there was the day I noticed a glaring inconsistency. A photo of Rachel by the pool, drink in hand, tagged in some five-star Balinese resort. Except, in the reflection of her oversized sunglasses, the setting wasn't a beach at all. It looked like a cabin in the woods. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, telling me it must have been a filler photo she'd used to pad her content. I told myself I was overthinking. Rachel wasn't just my wife. She was my partner of nearly a decade. We'd been through tough times before. Surely there was an explanation, right? But my gut wouldn't let it go. It was late one night, as I sat scrolling through her Instagram feed, that I made the decision to follow her on her next work trip. The idea was ridiculous. I didn't have the kind of job where you could just up and leave. But at this point, my gut was screaming louder than reason. Rachel's next trip was an exclusive collaboration, she said. She wouldn't even tell me the exact location, just that it was remote, off-grid, and super secretive to maintain the brand's mystique. She promised to send pictures and call when she could. But instead of trusting her, I loaded up her location-sharing app, a feature we'd started using when I took long work trips and booked a ticket to the nearest airport I could find to where her dot appeared on the map. That's how I ended up in a tiny rental car on a winding dirt road deep in the woods, cursing under my breath as I tried to make sense of where the app was leading me. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel, as the road finally opened up to a small cabin nestled in the trees. There was her car and another, parked right next to it. I should have turned around, driven back home, but I couldn't. My legs carried me to the front door, and when I saw them through the cabin window, Rachel and a man I recognized immediately as her ex, I felt my entire world collapse. I froze at the window, my feet rooted into the ground as I stared at the scene unfolding inside the cabin. Rachel was sitting on a plush couch, wineglass in hand, laughing at something her ex David, of all people, was saying. It wasn't just the laughter that gutted me. It was the way she looked at him, head tilted, a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. I don't know how long I stood there, watching. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once. Every cell in my body screamed at me to barge in, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. I didn't want to know what came next. And then I saw it. The way David leaned in, his hand resting on her knee, and the way she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned toward him, their foreheads nearly touching. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. I felt like I was watching someone I didn't even know. Finally, I moved, stumbling back from the window. My head spun as I made my way to the side of the cabin, out of sight. I leaned against the cold wood of the exterior, trying to piece together what I'd just seen. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and snapped a photo of their cars in the driveway. Not that I needed evidence. The scene inside was seared into my mind like a cruel joke. I should have left, driven home, packed her things, and thrown them on the curb. But I didn't. Instead, I crept to the back of the cabin, where I found another window cracked open slightly. Their voices spilled out into the cool night air. "Can't keep doing this," Rachel's voice said, quieter now but tinged with nervous laughter. "He's going to figure it out." "Rachel, come on," David replied, his tone easy and familiar. "He's clueless. He believes everything you tell him, doesn't he?" I clenched my fists, the words cutting deeper than I thought possible. "I mean, yeah, but it's just getting harder, you know? The trips, the lies. I'm always on edge, like he's going to show up out of nowhere. Relax. We'll leave soon. Just a few more months, and we'll be out of here. Everything will be set. Leave? What the hell were they talking about?" "That's easy for you to say," Rachel shot back, her voice sharp now. "You're not the one who's tied to him financially. Do you know how much debt I've racked up trying to keep up this stupid influencer persona? He's the one holding the cards." David chuckled, the sound so casual it made my blood boil. "And you're the one holding the passwords to all his accounts. Don't forget that." My heart dropped into my stomach. All this time, I thought Rachel's job was taking her to the ends of the earth to capture perfect sunsets and crystal clear waters. Now, I was standing in the dark outside a cabin, listening to her and her ex talk about running off together, and apparently leaving me with the fallout. I wanted to burst in, scream, demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was dealing with something much, much darker. Whatever Rachel and David had planned, it wasn't just about an affair. It was about erasing me from the picture entirely. I slipped back to the car, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her now. Not when I was so furious I could barely think straight. I needed to figure out what to do. I needed a plan. The drive back to my hotel was a blur. The anger I felt earlier had curdled into something colder, sharper. Betrayal was one thing, but this... Rachel wasn't just cheating, she was plotting, and I couldn't stop replaying their words in my head. Passwords to all his accounts. Leave soon. He believes everything you tell him. By the time I reached the hotel, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, the pieces of Rachel's deception swirling in my mind. If they were planning to vanish, what did that mean for me? For our life? The mounting debt she'd hinted at, was that even real? Or just another part of the web she'd spun? And what about the accounts she mentioned? My accounts? I grabbed my laptop and opened my banking app. Everything looked normal at first glance, but the more I dug, the more alarm bells went off. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Small withdrawals that I hadn't made. Even some charges for trips Rachel supposedly collaborated on that I now realized she probably never took. The worst part, these weren't recent. They went back months, maybe even years. I leaned back, my head pounding. Had I really been this blind? Was I so desperate to believe in the picture-perfect life Rachel showed the world that I missed every single red flag? I couldn't stop wondering, was there some part of me that let this happen? Was I complicit in my own downfall? The thought was a punch to the gut. But I didn't have time to wallow in self-pity. Rachel and David were planning something big, and if I didn't act fast, I'd be left holding the bag. The next morning, I made a call to an old friend, Ben. We'd been close in college, but life had pulled us in different directions. Ben was a lawyer now, sharp as a tack, and someone I knew I could trust. I filled him in on everything. Rachel's trips, the cabin, the conversation I overheard. I left out the part about the shaking hands and the sleepless night. "Jesus, Mark," Ben said when I finished. "You're not just dealing with infidelity. You're dealing with fraud, maybe even identity theft." I swallowed hard. Hearing it out loud made it feel even more real. What do? I asked. First, lock down everything, Ben said. Bank accounts, credit cards, passwords. Make sure Rachel doesn't have access to a single dime. And start gathering evidence texts, emails, anything you can find. If they're planning to run, you need to stay 2 steps ahead. It felt like good advice, but the reality of it was daunting. I wasn't the kind of guy who dealt in subterfuge and strategy. I was a fix it with a conversation kind of guy, or at least I used to be. But this wasn't a problem a conversation could fix. Rachel had made sure of that. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and started digging. I pulled up Rachel's social media accounts, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that could connect her influencer persona to the life she was hiding. And that's when I found the account. A second Instagram page, buried under a different name, but filled with photos of her and David. Cozy dinners, weekend getaways, inside jokes in the captions. It wasn't public, but it wasn't hidden either. It was almost like she wanted to be caught, like she wanted me to find out this way. I scrolled through the photos, my stomach churning. In one, she was wearing the necklace she'd told me was a gift from a brand collaboration. In another, she and David were holding hands on a beach. The same beach she'd sent me a postcard from months earlier. I couldn't decide which was worse, the lies, or how easily she seemed to live with them. Finally, I stopped scrolling and just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to smash the laptop, throw it across the room, scream until my throat was raw. But another part of me, quieter, steadier, knew I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Rachel and David were playing their game, but now I was playing mine. I saved screenshots of every photo, every caption. I logged out of the account and locked my phone. And as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, one thought echoed louder than the rest. She's not leaving me with nothing, not without a fight. By the time I got back home, I was a different man. Whatever heartbreak I'd felt outside that cabin had hardened into resolve. I didn't just want to confront Rachel. I wanted to dismantle the house of cards she'd built and make sure she couldn't pull anyone else into her lies again. If she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The first step was locking down everything. I spent the next 2 days going through every financial account, every subscription, even my email passwords. I froze our joint bank accounts, transferred my paycheck to a private account, and alerted my credit card companies to watch for unauthorized charges. It was tedious and exhausting, but by the end, I felt like I'd taken my first real step toward taking control. The next step was confronting Rachel. I waited until she came home from her trip, luggage in hand, her face glowing with that influencer smile I used to adore, but now couldn't stand. "Hey babe," she chirped as she walked through the door. "How was your week?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my laptop, opened the photos of her and David, and turned the screen toward her. Her smile froze. "What's this?" "You tell me," I said, my voice low and steady. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to me for a very, very long time." Her face went pale, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Mark, it's not what it looks like. He's just a friend." "Stop," I cut her off. "Don't insult me by lying again. I followed you, Rachel. I saw you with him. I heard you talking about leaving, about using me for my accounts. Don't stand there and tell me it's not what it looks like." She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "What do you want me to say?" she asked finally, her voice shaky. "That I made a mistake? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But you don't understand David. He understands me in ways you never could." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Is that what you told yourself every time you lied to me? Every time you drained our accounts to fund your fake life, her expression hardened. You don't get it, Mark. I was drowning in that life with you. Do you know what it's like to always feel like you're not enough? To have to be the perfect wife, the perfect influencer, all while you're too blind to see how miserable I was. Miserable, I snapped. You mean miserable with the house I bought, the life I supported, the trips you faked? Spare me, Rachel. I've heard enough. Over the next few weeks, I turned Rachel's world upside down. With Ben's help, I filed for divorce and had her served with papers that spelled out exactly what she stood to lose. Thanks to the evidence I'd gathered, it was clear that she'd been using my accounts without my consent, and we leveraged that to ensure she couldn't touch a dime of our shared assets. Rachel fought back, of course. She played the victim, tried to paint me as the controlling husband who drove her into David's arms. But the receipts didn't lie, and when I showed the judge the second Instagram account, Rachel's entire argument crumbled. As for David, he vanished as soon as the legal proceedings began. Turns out, he wasn't just using Rachel emotionally, he was funneling her money into his own failing ventures. The moment she became a liability, he cut and ran, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. In the end, Rachel lost everything. The house, the accounts, even the social media persona she'd worked so hard to maintain. Her followers turned on her when the truth came out, and last I heard, she was living with her parents, trying to figure out what to do next. It's been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. I wish I could say I'm completely over it, but the truth is, some wounds don't heal overnight. There are days when I wonder how I didn't see it sooner, how I let myself believe in a life that was never real. But there are other days, better days, when I remind myself that Rachel's betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of hers. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When your world falls apart, you don't have to build it the same way again. You can start over, piece by piece, and make something stronger, something real. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.